60 Minutes, coming up next on Channel 2.
Welcome to one of my favorite eating places, the Kraft Kitchens, where all those great recipes come from. Hi, Barb.
Hi, Mr. Hurley.
Like Chef's Surprise one-pan meals, only the Kraft cooks could put together just the right combination for each Chef's Surprise to make the most of your hamburger, hot dogs or ham, beef cubes, or love that tuna. Chef's Surprise, the Kraft recipe for one-pan meals.
The nicest part about a hot shower is the hot water. Now, if you have a large family, you're going to use a lot of hot water. That's why it makes sense to use a gas water heater. Because it heats water faster, it conserves energy, and that saves natural resources. Yes, there's nothing like gas for heating water. And if you don't believe us, just ask the guys who take showers at the LA Coliseum.
This is Chet Huntley for American Airlines announcing the fairest fares of all. Only American offers these 3 great ways to fly and save, and they're available right now. You can fly during the day and save 12.5%, fly at night and save 20%, or fly 90 days after making your reservation and save 48%. And each fare can be part of a money-saving vacation package. What could be fairer? For details, call American or your travel agent today. American Airlines, fairest fares of all.
Steve McQueen tonight at 9 on 2. It's 8 o'clock.
Tonight we'll be listening in Nixon country. We went to the weekly Kiwanis Luncheon in Noblesville, Indiana, to hear what people are saying about the president and Watergate, in a city that twice gave Richard Nixon an 80% majority.
In a system that tries to handle 90 billion pieces of mail a year, the horror story is a legion and embarrassing. Even the Nixon cabinet is not immune. 10 tickets to the last Super Bowl game were mailed in New York on January 5th to the Secretary of Commerce. They arrived in Washington by a certified air mail January 16th, 2 days after the game had been played.
The Postal Service has been a political dumping ground for almost 2 generations.
And tonight we look for the first time at the Soviet arsenal, their half of the balance of terror.
I'm Wally Safer. I'm Mike Wallace. Those stories and more tonight on 60 Minutes.
Head up! Get the feet apart! Head up! Come on, move it, Jeff, move it!
Hey, Coach, you look like you could use some Gatorade.
Almost, come on!
All right, man. You all look like you could use some Gatorade.
Gatorade Thirst Quencher. More than just a mouth refresher, Gatorade helps replace what your body is thirsty for. Give your body what it's thirsty for. Gatorade.
Polaroid's new SX70. Just touch the button. Now these pictures, developing themselves outside the camera, are hard and dry. Minutes later, you have finished photographs seemingly as real as life itself. The new SX70 land camera from Polaroid.
Watergate went into suspension this July 4th week, forcing the newest American guessing game show off the television screens while we all reflect on happier events in the nation's history. In the big cities, here in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and of course Washington, any gathering of more than one person automatically initiates a Watergate discussion, debate, or even mock trial. Well, we thought it wouldn't be a bad idea this week to go out into deepest Nixon country to find out what people are saying there. We chose the city of Noblesville, Indiana. Population, 8,000.
In Noblesville, it's not only the nation's birthday, but it's Noblesville's own 60th birthday as well. It's hard to find a place that went more powerfully for Richard Nixon in the last 2 elections. More than 80% for the president.
America, America, God shed his grace on thee.
On Wednesday at noon in Noblesville, the Kiwanis Club holds its weekly luncheon meeting. It begins the same way each Wednesday. America the Beautiful, followed by the oath of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Last week, we joined them for lunch and sat with 6 of Noblesville's community leaders. We ate excellent fried chicken and talked about Watergate and related subjects. John Neal, publisher of the local newspaper. Stephen Cook, an attorney. Robert Cope, a minister. Charles Clark, an insurance agent. Melvin Featherston, city auditor. And Vincent McLaughlin, a retired banker.
We're reading an editorial, a front-page editorial from your paper. All right. Which I did right. Watergate Circus. As America sits in front of its television screen and watches the Watergate Circus broadcast almost daily from the Capitol building, the question must certainly arise. Is it not true that after you take the politics out of Watergate, you have the U.S. Senate investigating a second-degree burglary? One might think this tremendous offensive against evil might be better directed against killers, robbers, rapists, and drug pushers. Then one must remember there would be little political mileage in that. Given all the Watergate hearings, everything you've read, everything you might suspect, if the election was held this evening, how would you vote?
I would vote for Richard Nixon.
I would vote for President Nixon based upon the fact that we don't have any, at least at this point, any real conclusive facts from the Senate hearing, and certainly President Nixon hasn't had an opportunity to give his full side of it at this point.
Afraid I'll have to say no.
Mr. McLaughlin.
I would vote for Mr. Nixon. I would also vote for Mr. Nixon.
And so would I. Is there any revelation that could shake your faith in the presidency? In Richard Nixon's presidency?
Well, yes. I think probably everyone would have to answer yes to that. If I was convinced it was proved that Nixon was a party to the Watergate affair and was also very knowledgeable and participated in the cover-up of this affair, I would be shaken in his leadership.
If the hard facts, for example, Dean's testimony, if they had come out early, right at the beginning, I'm sure my confidence would have been shaken to the crumbling point, actually. Secondly, and it hasn't been mentioned here today, I'm not sure it's relevant, but I think inherent in all of our feelings is some degree of satisfaction or pride or sense of accomplishment in what President Nixon has accomplished.
I like Steve. I think his accomplishments are great enough that they do overshadow this. I do at the same time feel that his answer to the present Dean testimony, which is the most damning of everything that's come out, are going to have a great influence on my thinking.
Mr. McLaughlin.
I think we certainly are in no position to answer this question, would you vote for him, on the basis of what we know now. Because I believe in giving the man a full chance to prove one way or the other. And as one of the men said, that how he answers the Dean testimony, that we ought to do it. I can't conceive of a man in that position taking the risk of a cover-up. Now, if he's that naive, then I'd say he doesn't have any place in the presidency.
If these charges are substantiated, then whoever is guilty ought to be treated as any other American citizen would be under the circumstances. But I think on the part of all of us, there's going to have to be a great deal of forgiveness and willingness to go ahead and do better than we've done in the past in the days and years that are going to come.
The United States is my country, Nixon is my president, and I have faith in both. Even with on the stormy seas, that when the sea calms and everybody gets wrung out, why they'll get down to sift out maybe the basic facts. If someone is guilty and proven guilty by our form of government, why we'll have to accept this, correct our mistakes, and move forward, regardless of which party is in power or will be in power. It's the best type of government that's ever known to man, and I have faith in both.
Don't you wonder that a politician, which you all admit is as astute as Richard Nixon, that he could be guilty in this case of at least gross negligence?
Well, I think there's a possibility that he could be guilty until all the facts is in and all the testimony. I think our system of ferreting out these things gives the man this right to prove his innocence, and I don't think we can really make that judgment until all the facts are in and find out who's sort of distorting the facts and who isn't.
Well, this, what you say, raises a theory that a lot of people, I guess you would regard as liberals, seem to be espousing these days, which is that if the president didn't know about it, he was responsible. And if he didn't know about it, he was irresponsible.
I think that's easy to say, but it's really not practical. In the president's position, of course I realize that they say, well, he should have known, but how does he possibly know about all the things that really are being done in his name, perhaps, and particularly didn't want him to know?
The intelligence gathering activities of one political party vis-a-vis the other, I think it's gone on for years. Maybe it's just fortuitous that the Nixon administration was the one who got their hand, who was caught with their hand in the cookie jar, but...
Do you think that's because the press as such has disliked Mr. Nixon and that they may have made a real effort in this case and maybe not in somebody else's, for instance, Goldwater or Kennedy as such?
Would you gentlemen go along with that the press or television or media have it in for Mr. Nixon?
I don't think that so much. I think that I don't think Nixon is their favorite. And yet at the same time, I don't feel from what I read that things are slanted against Nixon. But at the same time, there is the terrific volume that are being presented to the public on this issue. It in itself are painting it, whether it's blown out of proportion or not, the volume itself is going to make it look as though it may be much more severe than it actually was.
Supposing the president laid his hand down in Noblesville, Indiana, and all of you or any one of you were selected to join that inner group in the White House, you think you could have gone along with that, given the nearness to power that you...
Well, I can't honestly answer it. I'm human. There is a very good possibility that I would have been drawn up in such a power sweep, and you get to a point, I'm sure, in high politics where the end justifies the means, and especially if it's well known that this type of thing prevails, I could easily see where I could be caught up in it.
You'd have to have a tremendous amount of courage to stand out against the pull of that kind of a situation.
You might be caught up in the web before you even knew it. And then the question is how do you get out, or how do you live with yourself in this thing? It's very difficult.
If you're starting out to see the USA, you may not get very far. because there's a serious gasoline shortage. Quite a few gas stations have closed, and a lot that are open don't have a lot of gas. So if you have a big car, you may have a big problem. But if you have a Volkswagen, which gets about twice the gas mileage as the average car, you can leave your problem behind.
Look what you get free when you buy this Frigidaire top freezer refrigerator. A team of ice makers delivering ice when you need it, dependably and automatically. Frigidaire has made it possible for its dealers to offer you an automatic ice maker free when you buy a 15 or a 17 cubic foot top freezer refrigerator. You pay only for the plumbing installation. Hey, fellas, it's getting hot out here. How's it going?
Another shipment coming through.
Beautiful. Just beautiful.
Denture wearers, wake up to the cleaning power of a million tiny scrub brushes. That's Polident tablets. Green Polident has Dentrol. It gives Polident cleaning power like a million tiny scrub brushes, scrubbing away film, odor, and even stubborn stains between teeth. They don't stop till dentures are clean. Try Polident tablets or economical powder. Polident cleans like a million tiny scrub brushes.
Hi! I'm Peter Pan, and I bring the Peanut Eaters butter peanuts.
What? He must mean Peter Pan, the peanut butter eaters peanut butter.
You can trust kids, they're peanut butter eaters.
He's weird, but he makes a great peanut butter sandwich.
Peter Pan is the peanut butter eater's peanut butter. I said that right, didn't I?
2 years ago, by an act of Congress, the old Post Office Department, politically controlled and patronage-ridden, was reorganized as the U.S. Postal Service. The first step, it was hoped, on the way to rescuing our steadily deteriorating mail delivery. Well, we soon learned to our dismay that reorganization did little to make things better. On the contrary, in many cities, they got a good deal worse. Last month, it even looked for a while as though the mailmen were going out on strike. And in some cities, notably New York City, they still may. But nationwide, a new contract has now been negotiated and awaits ratification by the rank and file. Every one of them gets a raise, and all of us have been promised a rise in postal rates. But what about the promise of better mail service? That's what 60 Minutes set out to explore. Back in 1860, the old Pony Express carried a letter from St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento, California in 10 days. Here in New York, it took a letter almost that long recently to travel just 5 blocks. Maybe the Pony Express wasn't such a bad idea after all. Last year, it made a one-day comeback. It was a shaky comeback to begin with.
Hold him! Get him right now. Give him his hand.
Under the sponsorship of the National Association of Professional Bureaucrats, a team of 8 horses and 7 riders raced the U.S. Postal Service from Philadelphia to Washington. Out of 87 letters, the Pony Riders, taking 19 hours to reach Washington, beat the Postal Service 84-3. The last of the Postal Service mail didn't get to the capital for 8 days. The most recent survey, in fact, shows the Postal Service misses its own delivery standards 16% of the time. That's a delay for more than 14 billion pieces of mail this year. 10 years ago, a letter got to its destination faster than it does today, even though the Postal Service has been reorganized. The question is why? Well, first of all, consider the size of the problem. The Postal Service has more employees than any other company in the world. Its dollar volume is 5th largest in the world, bigger than Chrysler or IBM or U.S. Steel. But it doesn't turn a profit. Far from it. Instead, it loses almost $2 billion every year. And that's a record, too. The fact is, the job the Postal Service has to do is awesome. More than 90 billion pieces of mail every year. That's more than 400 pieces of mail for every man, woman, and child in the United States. More than all the rest of the world's mail put together. Well, even if the Postal Service were 99% efficient, and we all know that it isn't, even if only 1% of all the mail were lost or delayed, Still, that is 900 million complaints annually. In a system that tries to handle 90 billion pieces of mail a year, the horror story is a legion and embarrassing. For example, back in February, the Postmaster General called in all of his regional postmasters for a get-together in Washington. As a courtesy, President James Rademacher of the Letter Carriers Union was invited by mail. The invitation traveled the 12 blocks from Postal Service headquarters to the Letter Carriers Union headquarters in 6 days. Senator Gale McGee of Wyoming heads the Senate's Post Office Committee. It didn't do the service any good when the senator's Christmas cards, mailed from New York to friends in Washington, all arrived after New Year's. Even the Nixon cabinet is not immune. 10 tickets to the last Super Bowl game were mailed in New York on January 5th to the Secretary of Commerce. They arrived in Washington by a certified air mail January 16th, 2 days after the game had been played. What's the problem? Well, first of all, the Postal Service is in desperate need of mechanization. There are 11,000 over-age facilities. Some go back 60 years or more. In New York, the elegant old General Post Office is a Stanford White architectural masterpiece built when World War I ended, and it's still in use. And some of the mail handling techniques date from before that. The tedious, slow, time-consuming sorting process. Sort, resort, and sort again. What little mechanization the post office does makes slaves of its operators. This sorter, working at the rate of 1 letter every second, requires an operator to key the destination to an automatic sorting machine. The work is so monotonous that no one can do it efficiently for more than 30 minutes at a stretch. And mail gets lost this way. Part of today's problem is a lack of manpower. Postmaster General Elmer Classen has testified for the Congress that the mistake was his. The Postmaster General comes from private industry, an Horatio Alger story, from office boy to president of the American Can Company. When he came to the Postal Service, he now admits, he may have prematurely cut the payroll. And yet, look, you came into the job, and within the first year and a half that you've been in the job, 60,000 jobs have gone down the drain. You've laid off, in effect, 60 to 65,000 people, at the same time that the service is deteriorating. Now, people say, Classen just wants to balance the budget. He doesn't want good service.
That's not right, really. We're committed to giving good service. But removing 60,000 people from the payroll hurt us in some areas and helped us in others. We have locations today that are still overmanned.
You mean you still have too many people?
In some locations, yes.
Where?
Well, I won't identify them specifically by name. All that does is create more problems for me.
James Rademacher is head of the Letter Carriers Union, and he says that the hiring freeze has actually cost lives.
Our statistics today in a survey we've just completed indicate that 35 letter carriers have died since there's been a freeze put on, died on the job because of the increased pressure, because of the fact they've had to absorb another letter carrier's route. And we have now received responses from 128 cities in this country, small and medium-sized cities, not the large cities. And in just those cities, there have been 381 heart attacks in the last year since the job freeze went on and since letter carriers are forced to absorb more territory.
And the job freeze went on because Classen said, look, we've got to save money, we've got to stop losing money. Is that the point that you're making?
That's the point, and he said that as you got close to last year's presidential election, that you don't need another postage rate increase. And so he proved that to the people by allowing an early retirement system, and 40,000 people then left the service. The skilled, the experienced people that have always considered it a career left the service, and you then saved a 1-cent rate increase, but you're taking it out now on the hides of the people that carry the mail.
Incidentally, if you think postal service is better elsewhere, think again. It's true that Western Europe enjoys the luxury of 2, even 3 deliveries a day. But it's also true that delays, inefficiency, and mounting deficits are fast eroding that once superior service. In the United States, as in most other countries, the Postal Service has a monopoly on letter mail. That's the letter I write to you. But a competitive free-for-all has been building for commercial mail services. Now, in the last 10 years, the Post Office lost more than 1/3 of its package business. Lost it to one of the most efficiently run private companies in the country, United Parcel Service. Even the Postmaster General pays UPS compliments.
They are a very effective competitor. They give better service we've been giving. They have far less damage than we do. We damage 5 packages to every one of theirs.
Is it possible that United Parcel just has better management than the Postal Service has?
I think United Parcel has some very fine management. I've learned to know them quite well. They have men who are experienced in the type of business they deal with. They've had better training programs than we have. They have greater incentives for their management people. Each one of their employees at a management level is a partner in the business.
To try and get some parcel business back, the Postal Service expects to spend $1 billion to duplicate the UPS network of bulk mail centers. The Postal Service claims that 33 of these new centers will be in operation within 2 years. And incidentally, 2 of those plants are helping provide employment for a former Postmaster General. Winton Blunt, Mr. Classen's predecessor, has his own construction company, which does very well in the federal contract field. Blunt Construction won contracts for building bulk mail plants in Detroit and Des Moines. Contracts worth more than $40 million. But when will all of these new parcel plants really go into operation? The Postal Service claims that its biggest and costliest new installation across the Hudson River from New York will be working by late summer. In fact, it will be handling only foreign mail then. It may not be ready for U.S. packages for another year. 5 miles away, the newest package plant opened just a year ago. Now it's due to close down, out of date already, and $12.5 million worth of automated machinery will be broken down for parts. Meanwhile, over at United Parcel, they're expanding their existing network to handle an expected 20% increase in parcel business over the next 5 years. And while parcel post is mailed at the post office, UPS picks up and delivers door to door at lower rates. The competitive outlook is bleak. There is even competition for the junk mail business. Direct mail advertising and solicitation is a $60 billion a year business, and another $2 billion or so for postage. 5 years ago, there were a handful of private mailers in the United States. Today, there are more than 200. Tom Murray, who was once a hotel busboy in Ireland, competes with the U.S. Postal Service as creator and president of the Independent Postal Service of America.
Well, we can do everything better than what they're doing, simply because our people have an incentive and with profit as their motive, and we don't have to have an act of Congress to make a change. The difference is that when our carriers come in here and see 500 magazines that might weigh a half a pound each, that's 250 pounds. But our people look at it as 500 nickels, whereas the U.S. mailman, he gets paid the same whether he delivers a pound magazine or a half-ounce letter.
Tom Murray sells his postal routes for $1,000 each. His buyers are housewives and students and the retired, who don't mind a little walking and a little extra money. Their clients are grocery stores, department stores, anyone with anything they're trying to sell or advertise by mail. Ipsos rates are as much as 20% under the U.S. Postal Services. They've sold franchises in 30 states, and by 1980, they hope to reach 40 million of the country's 60 million homes. United Parcel Service and Tom Murray are observing an ancient American tradition. They are underselling and outcompeting the U.S. Postal Service. 80% of the nation's mail is business mail, bills, statements, the communications link between the economy and the citizen. The Postal Service's great hope to speed the mail, mostly business mail, is bar coding. Addresses and zip codes are hard for a computer to read. Computers speak in simpler terms. Well, this is an address a computer can read. One computer can anyway, an experimental installation in Cincinnati. The machinery will spew forth mail at the rate of tens of thousands of letters an hour. The equipment itself costs more than $1.5 million per machine. Odd sizes and envelopes that are too fat get rejected. But the Postal Service hopes to convince big mailers to buy their own coding machines. If not, the service will have to spend more millions for more machines to put in front of more operators to translate addresses into code. A go, no-go decision on bar coding is due in 1975. It'll be some years after that before the system is in full use. Where there is automation, there is IBM. This sophisticated piece of electronic machinery, $1.5 million worth, reads printed addresses at the rate of 43,000 an hour. It won't read handwriting. This optical character reader is currently being evaluated by the Postal Service. It too may go online to speed the flow of business mail. But oddly, there is a kind of printing it cannot read. The printing that comes from the newest, costliest, and most sophisticated office typewriter built by, you guessed it, IBM. The sleek wonder retails for more than $700. It can even correct mistakes. Within 5 years, conservatively, 3 million envelopes a day may be typed on these new machines. And they may have to be hand-sorted through the U.S. mails. James Rademacher is a powerful union leader. And he has a simple, straightforward proposal to solve the current mail crisis.
I feel that what this country needs is a good 10-cent stamp, and we need no other stamps. We need no airmail stamps. We need an attitude that says, for that 10-cent stamp, your letter is going to be delivered in the most expeditious manner possible, by air, by truck, by train, or by bus, as fast as the Postal Service can move it. Not when they want to move it, but when that letter enters the mail stream, they should be moving it. Now, I'm telling you this, and it's a prediction well in advance, but I feel that a 10-cent stamp would mean the end of all future rate increases, because the increased productivity, the increased morale, the increased mechanization is going to spell the end to any future rate increases, even though I know that there are going to be future pay increases.
Mr. Klassen agrees. He needs that 10-cent stamp and the $1 billion it'll bring to pay for new wage increases negotiated with the unions. But money is not the only source of Mr. Klassen's problems.
Mr. Wallace, let me make this point clear. We've had some problems, but I want everybody to understand that all the problems we have today just didn't happen yesterday or last year. They've been decades in the making. I'm disturbed over the criticism we're getting, and I realize some of it's justified, but much of it's destructive. The criticism we're getting from many levels is not helping us to improve the service a bit. What I'm saying to you, the Postal Service has been a political dumping ground for almost 2 generations.
What do you mean a political dumping ground?
Well, postmasters, letter carriers, rural letter carriers, they were all politically appointed, and so were a great many other people in the service.
Are you suggesting that incompetents were appointed to jobs that they just couldn't do? And that's one of the problems that you've got?
Mr. Wallace, I have to be very careful how I respond to that, because things are too often taken out of context. I've said publicly many times recently that we have some very fine, able, dedicated people. But you must also keep in mind, when you have an organization the size of this one, that even though we were operating with a much fewer workforce today than we did a couple of years ago, we still have people who are not fulfilling the share of responsibilities. We don't have the same latitude here in government as you do in business. We don't have the right to lay people off even if we don't need them, we can't lay them off. Attrition has to take care of it. Now, the other thing that gives us real concern, Congress legislated some actions for us to take. They said you're to provide service, and you bring your costs and revenues into balance. That's what we came here to do. But we need time to do this. I'm convinced if Congress will support us, instead of criticizing us constantly, we can get the job done.
Well, in what way is the Congress failing to support you? I'm not sure that I understand. What is it that you want from Congress that you're not getting? Well, who's getting in your way?
Let me point out to you. Following our last labor negotiations, the unions didn't get everything they wanted. So they went to Congress. And they got substantial support from Congress. Sure, it's never become law, but they asked for added benefits they couldn't get through negotiations. The union says they're going to do that again. Congress is going to entertain that again.
Why should the unions have so much clout with the Congress that you seem to imply?
Well, Mr. Wallace, we have some 600,000 union members throughout this country. They're located in every area of the United States, and they're fairly effective. They've been very effective in dealing with the political powers. That's the way they were trained. That's what was expected of them.
You mean that they got 600,000 votes and more?
That's right.
And Congress is not going to trifle with the postal unions?
I would think that's right.
And that's getting in your way?
Well, I want for us to have a reasonable opportunity to make this thing work, because I'm convinced it can be made to work.
But you're not answering my question.
Well, repeat your question again.
The question is, the political clout of the Union with the Congress is getting in the way of the efficient operation of the Postal Service. Is that an accurate statement?
The political clout of the unions is very effective, and it does interfere with Congress's relationship with us.
60 Minutes will continue after station identification. CBS News Retrospective premieres with the famed Murrow-McCarthy confrontations Sunday at 6, 5 Central on CBS.
It's not far from your living room to an accurate report of what's going on in the world each day. Just join us here in the KNXT newsroom, Monday through Friday night at 11.
The feeling that comes from knowing you put your savings in exactly the right place. That's the Great Western feeling.
Go someplace super this summer. Switch to Ralph's, the supermarket with super low prices.
Steve McQueen in 30 minutes.
This portion of 60 Minutes is sponsored by
Northwestern Mutual Life, the quiet company people have been talking about for over 100 years.
You know, the best things in life aren't free. Not by a long shot. Like my car. I saved for it, and I'm still paying for it, but at least I'm enjoying it now. But my neighbor, Ross, he's the security-minded type. So much of his money goes into life insurance that last year he couldn't even take a vacation. Now that's overinsured. Me, I'm with Northwestern Mutual Life. They're the 7th largest life insurance company in America. And believe me, those Northwestern fellas are different. They understood that I had only so much money for life insurance. Oh, I wanted the protection all right for the wife and kids, but I had other expenses too. Bills, mortgage, car payments. So they fixed me up. Now I've got a good, solid insurance program, and I still have enough money to pay my bills and really enjoy a good life. The Northwestern. I tell you, they're my kind of company.
Northwestern Mutual Life, the quiet company people have been talking about for over 100 years.
When he was visiting the United States 2 weeks ago, Leonid Brezhnev proclaimed that the era of the Cold War is over. And this week in Helsinki, foreign ministers of 35 nations are trying to formalize an understanding between the countries of the East and the West. Mr. Brezhnev's statement in that meeting do not alter the fact that both the United States and the Soviet Union each have more than enough power at hand to reduce each other to dust. The Russians, who've always been most reluctant to show anything of their power, did make a film in the 60s to show off just how advanced their hardware had become. Well, this film has finally become available. And if in this look at the Soviet arsenal, it seems that the Russians have copied some of our weapons, it may also be apparent that they've adopted some of our military film techniques. They call it the loyal sons of the people. We call it the selling of the Soviet Pentagon. The soundtrack is theirs.
This is one of the units of the Soviet Army.
Дежурной смене к выполнению боевой задачи по обеспечению безопасности
Readiness relief. Proceed with ensuring the security of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. System number 1, ready. System number 2, ready. No distance is too great for these rockets. Where are they located? How many of them are there? It can only be stated that the strategic rockets are located where they are needed, and that there are as many of them as required. The Soviet Army also has an adequate number of self-sufficient mobile rockets. These are ready to destroy targets at any point of the globe with lightning speed. The strategic rocket forces are always ready for action. The anti-aircraft defense forces guard the country's airspace the clock round. Thousands of eyes constantly search the skies. Thousands of invisible lines lead to communications centers. A plane in square 4147. The plane makes no response to identification signals.
Подготовить к бою ракеты и истребители.
Report battle readiness. Finally, the order is given to destroy the target. Pilots of modern long-range aircraft are accustomed to doing things on a previously unheard-of scale, carrying dozens of tons, flying thousands of kilometers, and remaining airborne days at a time. A heavy rocket carrier is in the air. Modern aeronautics strives towards great altitudes. But it is just as important to be able to fly very low. One must slip past radar installations, rockets, and anti-aircraft artillery. One must glide as close as possible to the shadow cast by the plane. These are strategic rocket carriers. Can be fired hundreds of kilometers from the target. It'll hit with accuracy and can be equipped with a nuclear warhead. preparing for large-scale exercises. Rocket depth bombs can destroy an enemy submarine. Atomic submarines are the Navy's main strike force. They can fire ballistic rockets with nuclear warheads from any point in any ocean. Anti-tank forces are equipped with new weapons. This missile is guided by the gunner, who directs it to the target. The tanks find their way underwater by compass. Now it's the sapper's turn. The bridge is built in 10 minutes and 7 seconds. Nowadays, ground forces move in by land, sea, and air. An airborne landing force is getting ready to strike the enemy rear. The aggressor should bear in mind that if they start a war, the Soviet armed forces will retaliate with a swift, crushing blow.
Those are some of the cards the Russians hold at that Helsinki meeting. The Russians and ourselves both spend $80 billion a year keeping up with each other's weapons, which may be a prime reason why both countries, with pressing economic problems at home, are now at last prepared to talk about cutting military budgets. The balance of terror was reached 10 years ago. They're now happily trying to find a way of balancing a budget.
1933, 1973, 40 years of progress in cars and carburetors. There's a lot more to carburetors today, and they're a lot harder to keep clean. No doubt about it either. A dirty carburetor can cause rough idling, poor mileage, and reduced power. That's why STP gasoline treatment's more important than ever. It helps clean your carburetor, helps keep your engine in tune as you drive. Add a can of STP gas treatment. You'll really feel the difference.
When my younger brother got married, he told me he wanted to buy some life insurance. I offered to call my Northwestern man, but he said no. He wanted to try a big company. So I asked him, what's wrong with number 7? 7, he says. How come I've never heard of them? So I told him. They've been too busy making sure their life insurance is the best around to spend much time talking about it.
Northwestern Mutual Life. The quiet company people have been talking about for over 100 years.
When Nikita Khrushchev left the United States after meeting with President Eisenhower, there was some short-lived talk about détente and the spirit of Camp David. After Alexei Kosygin left President Johnson, we heard about the spirit of Glassboro. Well, now Chairman Brezhnev has gone home, and the word is peace and friendship and the spirit of San Clemente. What about it? Here is point-counterpoint.
After Comrade Brezhnev left the country on a red cloud of Soviet-American friendship the other day, I felt a little better. I mean, Jack, I was getting worried. Every time Big Pink and President Truthful signed another agreement, they'd break out another bottle of champagne, and they signed so many of them, I was afraid we were going to have an international drinking problem on our hands. When I look over the agreements they say they signed, I don't see who profited but the wine industry. They signed one agreement on arms limitation, which was really an agreement to sign an agreement if and when, at some future time, they came to an agreement. They signed another agreement not to kill us all with atomic war before consulting with each other. In other words, they agreed to pick up the Washington-Moscow hotline and get on the horn. But that they'd agreed to years ago. Then they announced a lot of other agreements, all very historic, I'm sure, like we both promised to preserve the ecological purity of the planet Mars, and neither side will use Venus as a nuclear submarine base. I don't mind meaningless agreements. I like a drink as well as the next man, and Henry Kissinger signs a new peace treaty every month now. But what I want to know is, was there a secret agreement like last year when Nixon gave away the food off the American dinner table? Are you running with me, Jack?
Nick, I'm of two minds on this summit meeting. Part of me, the suspicious part, echoes your apprehensions about a secret understanding. And after that wheat deal, I'm still suspicious about this talk of reciprocal trade. What do the Russians have to sell that we might prudently and profitably buy? Not their women's fashions, that's for sure. But there is another view, and it may be worth considering. Our generation has gotten spoiled, I suspect, on a diet of great big bombshell news. We don't want meetings, we demand confrontations. Mere progress isn't enough, we want broken records. Ours is a generation of crash programs and all-out efforts. We elevate mistakes to disasters and make catastrophes out of misfortunes. The Watergate scandal is bad enough by any yardstick, but we're not happy unless it's called the worst corruption in history. And so it goes. If a news event isn't loud and clamorous, filled with crashing cymbals, we falsely suppose it isn't worth listening to at all. The recent summer produced 9 agreements. They weren't absolutely meaningless, as you say, but okay, they were more form than substance. Yet in terms of U.S.-Soviet relations, Nick, we ought to keep in mind where we were and where we are now. And remember the homely truth that leg over leg, the dog goes to Dover. We can't do everything at once. The final communique described the meeting simply as a further milestone on the road to constructive relations. I'll settle for that, Nick, and hope that at Geneva in the fall, we go another peaceful mile.
Much of the mail we got following our last broadcast took us over the coals for the big close-ups we used of John Ehrlichman during our interview with him. One viewer said, 60 Minutes deserves a rebuke for its use of the camera during the Ehrlichman interview. You made him appear excessively beetle-browed and porcine. I consider this a perfect example of invisible editorializing. Another viewer wrote, frankly, I think he is guilty of sin, but those zeroed-in camera shots made me feel sorry for him. Be more fair to him and let him hang himself. But there was also this. It's no wonder Mike Wallace didn't make the Nixon hate list. He's going soft. He just sat there while Ehrlichman prattled about national security. He should have slammed Ehrlichman straight into the Fourth Amendment. Still another viewer wrote, I have been a Republican for many years, but after seeing and hearing John Ehrlichman on your program last week, I am willing to believe anything John Dean says. About Nicholas von Hoffman's decrying the fact that he did not make the White House enemies list, a viewer wrote, Nicholas von Hoffman belongs not on an opponent's list, but on an idiot's list. His commentaries have all the incisiveness of a slow-witted adolescent. And finally, several viewers tried and failed to duplicate the paper airplane we showed last week, the one that has aeronautical experts stumped as to why it flies so well. One viewer wrote, I understand that aeronautical engineers do not know why this plane flies. If I send them mine, maybe they could tell me why mine doesn't. I'm Mike Wallace.
I'm Morley Safer. We'll be back next Friday night at the same time with another edition of 60 Minutes.
1 of every 3 people suffers some symptoms of hemorrhoids. And I've found how several outstanding doctors have obtained successful results with Preparation H. In many cases, Preparation H gives prompt temporary relief from the pain and itching of hemorrhoidal tissues. Then, Preparation H actually helps shrink swelling of hemorrhoidal tissues caused by inflammation. There's no other formula like Preparation H, and Preparation H needs no prescription. Doctor-tested Preparation H.
Frank asked me the other day if I knew the name of an interpreter who speaks insurance. Imagine that. He said he was thinking about buying some life insurance, and he wanted to make sure he knew what he was getting. I told him about Northwestern Mutual Life. How they're the 7th largest in the country, but they don't push you into anything. How they listen to you and then make sure you know what you're getting. You know what he asked me for then? Their phone number.
Northwestern Mutual Life, the quiet company people have been talking about for over 100 years.
This portion of 60 Minutes has been sponsored by
Northwestern Mutual Life, the quiet company people have been talking about for over 100 years.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple.
For the 9th straight day, the value of the American dollar has dropped overseas. I'm Joseph Benty. I'll have details on that story and all the news from the KNXT newsroom at 11.